Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I actually want to kick off by saying a few words that you just don't hear on the internet enough, and that is, I made a mistake. And in today's video, I want to rectify that mistake by talking about this 50mm Leica Summilux. It's an absolute gem of a lens, but like the title of this video suggests, it is not my first rodeo with it. And therefore, we should probably kick this video off by talking about why I sold this lens in the first place. It was a few years ago now, but at the time I was suffering from a pretty terrible bout of gas. I needed the next camera. We've all been there, and I think that camera at the time was the Fuji X-T2. I think I owned it for a couple months, so I definitely didn't need the new camera, but that camera did come at the expense of, at the time, my most expensive lens, my 50mm Lux. The other reason as well that made getting rid of that lens a little bit easier was the fact that I had bought this. This is the Voigtlander 50mm f1.5 Nokton lens. It's an incredible lens, and it definitely made saying goodbye to that 50mm Lux that little bit easier. I'm going to chuck up on the screen now some timestamps if you want to hop around this video if you're feeling a little bit impatient, but for the rest of us, we're going to dive into exactly what this lens is. Now this lens here is a very expensive lens. It's a £3,500 50mm prime. It's absolutely bonkers money and is definitely not a value proposition. This being the black version weighs 335 grams. If you had opted for the silver version, that thing weighs 460 grams. And because it weighs 460 grams, it's actually closer to my Fujifilm 70mm to 300mm zoom than it is this thing. So I personally opt for black lenses because they weigh considerably less. The brass lenses definitely have that more premium feel, but it does come at the expense of quite a lot more weight. Inside of this lens then, we have got 9 aperture blades. At the wide open apertures, so f1.4, f1.8 and f2, the aperture blades are pretty curved. Beyond that point, you do get some hard edges on the aperture blades, but it does mean wide open, you get some awesome looking bokeh with this lens. So that all sounds great then, but what is this lens actually like to use? Now, for me, one of the really good things about this lens that stands out compared to any other lens that I've used is the aperturing. The aperturing on this lens is by far the clickiest and best feeling of any Leica lens I've ever used. The focus though on this lens feels very Leica-like, like you'd expect, and it has a finger tab on the bottom. For me, finger tabs are super important, and quite a lot of fast 50s just don't have them. They tend to have longer focus throws and no finger tabs, and I think the main reason for that is to try and help with accuracy. Having a longer throw means you can really hone in that focus. For me, I actually find that this 50mm Lux, even at f1.4, is super easy to focus. The other thing that I really like about the lens is the fact that it has a hood, because this lens does flare. Quite often what I found with the flare is that it's kind of red in color like the image on the screen now. I kind of like it, adds a bit of character. Ultimately, it is a flaw. So the lens hood helps counter that, and it also helps protect that front element as well. Like we said earlier, this isn't a cheap lens, and any kind of protection I can have of that front element is going to make me feel that little bit better. The lens also has 6-bit coding, and you don't have to worry about whether it does or doesn't, because this lens was new enough that all of them have 6-bit coding on the bottom, which definitely helps with the built-in body corrections and things like that, and also your EXIF data in Lightroom. Sharpness-wise, this lens is super sharp. Some people will tell you that the Summilux is sharper. It might be. It's definitely not as sharp as my 28mm Elmarit, which is the sharpest lens I think I've ever used, but it's more than sharp enough for anything that I would ever want it for. And especially because I use this lens quite a lot for portraits, and you don't want your portraits to always be super sharp. It's more than sharp enough though, and it still makes my 24 megapixel M10 feel like it's got far more megapixels than that, just because of the amount of detail this thing captures. In short then, this lens feels exactly like you'd expect a £3,500 lens to feel. So next up then, does this lens have that famous Leica pop effect to your images? Does it have that Leica look? I'm going to chuck some images up on the screen now. What do you think? Now, I absolutely love these images, but none of them were taken with this lens. They were all taken with the Voigtlander that I showed you earlier. So if you thought those images did have that Leica pop to them, then it just goes to show how good that Voigtlander is. Joking aside though, let's actually do some comparisons. The same image taken with both of these lenses. In terms of setup, these are all gonna be straight out of camera JPEGs. And having a look at this first image, I thought with this one, I was gonna try and have a look to see if we could see the difference in terms of color. I personally can't see much of a difference. I think the only thing that really stands out is the greens. I think the greens from the Leica look a little bit warmer, but to be honest, there's no difference in colors here that I think I would ever notice in practice. Next up then, we've got this image of a log, and this is to see how good the wide open sharpness is with both of these two. And it's pretty obvious with these two, I think, that the Summilux is considerably sharper than the Voigtlander is wide open. I think it also shows something else in this image, and that's to do with how different the bokeh is from both of these lenses. The Summilux looks far smoother than the Voigtlanders. The Voigtlanders looks kind of messy and it's very prominent, whereas the Summilux is far, far smoother. And bearing in mind these lenses are basically the same aperture, f1.4 and f1.5, I feel like the images look like they are exceptionally different. For me, by far, one of the biggest differences between these two lenses is purple fringing. The Voigtlander wide open with bright backgrounds is pretty awful, whereas the Summilux is really, really good in this regard. The difference between these two images, I think, is very, very stark. It's quite easy to fix in post sometimes, but it's nice to not have to even worry about it with the Leica. I think often when we talk lens performance, we all do over worry a little bit, and you kind of get to this point where you've got the Voigtlander is a very, very good lens at a good price point, and to get better performance, you have to spend an awful lot more money. The other thing as well when we talk about price is it's easy to look at this Leica lens and be like, it's just stupidly expensive. But 3 years ago, I sold this lens for £1,600, and I've just bought it back for over £2,000. So if I'd actually just owned the Summilux throughout the last few years, I'd have actually made money. Whereas the Voigtlander, I bought it almost brand new. I think it was £600–700, and now I'd struggle to sell it for £250. I've lost hundreds of pounds. So sometimes I think that's something we need to bear in mind. If you've got the money to spend on the Leica lens, long-term wise, it's probably the better investment. The Leica lens is the better performing lens, but you're gonna have to spend an awful lot more money on it. But I don't really think it's performance where the Summilux shines. I think it's all really to do with the feel. The built-in lens hood, the focus throw, the finger tab, all of these things lead into a lens that feels super good and easy to use. Whereas the Voigtlander, its biggest flaw is how it feels to use. It's a pretty terrible feeling lens, the aperture ring is sloppy, and whoever decided that this focus ring was a good idea needs sacking. And I think one thing I should add as well, and it might be viewed with a bit of negativity, is the fact some of my desire for this lens was the name on the front. I think it looks super cool on the cameras, both on my M6 and my M10, and to be honest, that is some of the reason I wanted it. I wanted it because I've now got a matching set. I've got my M6 and M10, and I've got a 28mm, a 35mm, and a 50mm that is all Leica. So it might be viewed with some negativity, but I wouldn't be being honest with you guys if I didn't tell you that some of the appeal to this lens for me was the name on the front of it. The other really big draw to this lens in particular for me is the fact that I've got the 28mm Elmarit. The 28mm Elmarit and this 50mm Summilux together, I do think offer the best two lens setup. And on a recent trip to Budapest, I found myself, to be honest, using the 28mm more often than the 50. But when I look through my Lightroom library, there's actually way more 50mm images that I like. I often think to myself that I love the 28mm focal range and I shoot more images with it, but when it actually comes to the keepers, I think I've got more 50mm from that trip than I do 28s. So maybe that goes a little bit into how good the lens is, or just a little bit to do with how I might actually just be better at shooting with a 50mm than I think I am. So I think then, there we have it. I took a round trip with this lens. I sold it a few years ago and I've bought it back again now. And to be honest, I couldn't be happier, even though that round trip's cost me hundreds and hundreds of pounds. But I absolutely love the lens. It's optically amazing, and importantly, it feels great to use as well. If you've enjoyed this video, then please do not forget to like and subscribe. There is plenty more Leica, Fuji, and travel content coming to the channel very, very soon. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Cheers.